Okay. Good evening. Today we are starting on Daf Testament Beis at a new Mishnah, about 8 lines down, and we're going to be learning that Amud Testament Beis, and we're going to be learning a lot of Daf Yud, but not all of it. We'll be starting at the last of the short lines on Yud Amud Beis, and then we'll be totally caught up in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. I don't think I'm traveling this week, so I can't. I have a bris. Yeah. No, it would have been a judgment if I didn't have a reason to not go. I would have gone in a minute. I asked the OU to fly me. They're like, no. I'm like, okay. All right. 8 lines down, Testament Beis, we have a new Mishnah. This Mishnah is a little bit cryptic, and it's going to require some unpacking, as we will soon see in our Gemara. The Gemara says, Kol shechavti b'shmiraso, in any case scenario where I am obligated in the shmira, if I'm obligated to take care of something that has the potential to cause damage, hechsharti es nizko, I've basically given a hechsher to its damage, meaning I'm achrei. If I have a dog, if I have something that can cause damage, whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is, but if I have anything, let's call one of the avos nizikin just to keep it clean, shor, bor, ma, behever, if I have any of those, then if I am chav b'shmiraso, then I'm hechsher as nizko. And even, says the Mishnah, if we have a case of hechsharti b'miktsas nizko, even if I have only been machshir part of the damage, and we'll see what this means in the Mishnah. What's a case scenario where I've enabled only part of damage? Either you're guilty or you're not. We'll see what this means in the Gemara. And in that case, where I'm partially held accountable for the damage, chavti b'tashlumi nizko kehechsher kol nizko, I'm obligated for all of the damage. So again, this case is difficult to understand on its face, and we'll analyze it in the Gemara. And when does this rule apply? When do these rules apply? Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, 3 lines into the Mishnah, it's only true by nechasim she'ein bahen me'ila. It's only true by properties that don't have a din of me'ila, where if you in fact misuse that property, you will violate the Isser me'ila. It doesn't apply in regards to nechasim she'ein shel b'nei bris. I should say it only applies in regards to Yidden. Nechasim hamiyuchadim. We don't know what these terms mean. It means that some type of special properties. Uv'chol makom, it applies anywhere. Chutz merishus hamiyuchedes lemazik, unless there's a property that's specific to the mazik where that doesn't apply. Let's say I have a cage for my German Shepherd, and you decide to put a stake in there to keep. You're not the smart one. That was miyuchedes lemazik. That was my cage from my German Shepherd. Don't put a piece of meat there if you're planning on keeping it. And then this case for sure makes no sense. What other exception to the rule of location? V'reshus hanizak v'hamazik, again, unclear. L'maisa, the Mishnah concludes, just like our Mishnah on Daf Beis had ended that we're chayav to pay b'meitav ha'aretz, that when we are paying from karka in a case of nezikim, we have to pay for the best of our lands. The same thing is true here in this Mishnah, that when I am obligated in the shmira of anything, I therefore have been machshir any damages that are caused, and therefore, says the Mishnah, I'm chayav to pay tashlumei nezek b'meitav ha'aretz. All right, let's dig in. The Gemara says a third of the way down on Testament Beis, Tanu Rabban, and we have a brisa. This brisa, at least in the beginning, reflects what we said in our Mishnah. Kol shechavti b'shmiraso, in anything that I have an obligation to watch over an item, hechsharti es nizko, I'm basically responsible if anything bad happens. And then the Gemara says, Ketzad, what is the case scenario? And this line is difficult to understand, so we're going to spend time on unpacking it. Says the Gemara, shor ubor, if I have an animal, or if I have a pit, shemasran l'chereshot v'katan, and I did something that wasn't smart, and I gave it to a child. I gave it to a chereshot of a kata, and someone who has no das, someone whom halachically we don't trust. And then guess what happened? V'hiziko, because I gave it to someone who's not a Baal Shmira. You don't give matches to a child. We'll see actually if that actually is true. Halachically, where my burden is. If I give my child matches at the age of 11 and they burn down a building, am I held accountable? That's going to be a halachic application from today's Gemara. We'll see that you're putter in such a case because there's too much that the kid has to do. We'll see. But anyways, the Gemara says this odd case. If I have a shor or a bor and I give it to Chereshot V'Kad Miziko, the halacha is chayav l'shalem. I, as the responsible party, am obligated to pay because my shmira was horrible. You don't give a wild animal to a 10-year-old. It's not a good idea. It's not going to end well, as we say. However, there is an exception. Masha'ein kain be'esh. So if I give a shor, or if I give a bor to, and I'm just going to use a 10-year-old as an example, but it doesn't matter. It's chereshot v'katan. I give a 10-year-old a shiur or a bor. If he does something wrong, I, who am his father, I am obligated in whatever he does, but not if I give him fire. So if I give fire to a 10-year-old and he causes damage, I'm pater. At least bedine adam. I might be chai bedine shamayim. Okay, b'may askinan. What is this odd bifurcation that when I give a child shiur and bor, all is fine and good, I'm chayiv, but if I give them eish, I'm completely pater? That's very weird. So says the Gemara, b'may askinan. Ilema b'shor kasher ubor mechusa. If what we're talking about is that the shiur is tied down, it has a rope on it, and the bor is covered, and what would be similar in regards to eish dechavasa gabe eish gachelas? That's like a coal. I mean, a coal is very hot, but until you fan the flames, it's dangerous, but you're not going to pick it up. And it's not really a fire right now. It's hot. It's like, we don't really use charcoal grills that often anymore. But back in the day, we'd put like, a gallon of kerosene on just for fun. And then when they would turn look a little bit white, then you knew you were ready to cook. So that is not the same thing as a flame in halacha. A gacheles is a coal. It's a lower level of risk than an actual flame. Okay, so says the Gemara that if that's true, that we have a gacheles, which is, low level risk, we should make no distinction between the cases of shiur where he's tied, the bor where it's covered, and the fire, which is gacheles. Why would the brisa at the open of our Gemara say that shiur and bor, I'm going to be held accountable if my 10-year-old does something wrong, but by the gacheles, I'm not? So the Gemara says, you're right. Ella, it must be, and we're just basically exactly halfway down on Testament base, it must be that it's b'shor mutar, the shiur was untied, ubor megula, and the pit was uncovered. And what would be similar? That's very risky, right? If I give a wild animal to a 10-year-old on a leash, and the animal weighs 2,000 pounds, and my 10-year-old weighs 65 pounds, this is not a battle worth fighting. The child's going to lose, and the animal's going to kill. So if it's untied, or if the pit is uncovered, and the chavasa gabe eish, what would be an equally irresponsible case of a shalheves, or Rambo First Blood, the torches, right? Just like, you can't give that to a child, 10 years old. That doesn't work. So if I do that, so then what do you mean, masha ein kain be'esh tepater? Then what would the brisa have meant when it said that I, as the father, am not liable for the stupidity of handing my child a flame? When do we say that a child who has a fire is pater? That's only if I give him a gacheles, and that child goes the extra mile and he fans it into a flame and then it causes damage. Aval shalhebes chayev, but everybody holds that a shalhebes is chayev, so that also can't be the case. My timer, why is it that a fire is more dangerous than a coal? The Gemara says the obvious. To habari hezeka. What do you mean? All you have to do is touch it to something. We are like very careful in our home. When our younger kids were lighting candles for Hanukkah, until a certain age that we trusted them, we would hold their forearm, we would hold their hand like this, let them hold the candle because they could burn the curtains down in 3 seconds. You don't give a lit match to a child. But the implication from the Gemara is that if in fact I do give only matches, a gacheles would be the equivalent. This is even less than a gacheles. If I give matches to a child and that child burns down the house, I'm for sure pater. That's for sure I'd be pater in that case, because there's way too much for the child to do. So therefore, we don't have an example for our case. Again, this odd bifurcation that if I give a child a shiur and a bor, then I would be chayav for their misbehaviors. But if I gave them eish, it's not going to be chayav. So 2/3 of the way down, the Gemara says it must be le'olam b'shor kasher or bor mechusa. Really, we're going back to our first answer, where the shiur is tied up and the bor is covered. And what would be the equivalent case in regards to eshu dechavasa gabe eish gacheles? What I gave over to my child was not a torch. I gave him over a coal. And says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Earlier when we saw this presentation, we said, no, that can't be, because a gacheles is not so dangerous. Says the Gemara, sure, darke lintuke. The Gemara here makes the halachic assumption that if you have an animal, it's darke lintuke. It is the nature of the animal to want to get untied. An animal that thinks it can get out of the knot that you tied around the post, it will. I don't know animals. I presume there's some truth to that. And bor darke linture. And pits, people, they kick the covers of the pits by accident. They start to slide over. They also get uncovered. However, a gacheles has an even lower level of risk in regards to a child. Why? because kama deshavikle ma'amya amya ve'azla. If I have a coal and I say to my child, please watch these coals in the grill, what's the most likely thing my kid's going to do? Nothing. Nothing. He's going to do nothing. And what happens when you leave coals alone? They get cooler and less risky. So that's why the Gemara says that when it comes to shor and bor, if I give my 10-year-old a shor and a bor, they're going to be chayev, because we assume that animals will get out of their knots and we assume that boars will get uncovered. But when it comes to a gacheles, we assume that will cool down, and therefore the child will be patur in such a case. So we've answered up that cryptic question of the Brisa. The Gemara just has one little last second question to ask over here on this, and then we're going to move on to a connected sugya. Wait 1 second. The Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan de Amar, he argues with Reish Lakish. We saw earlier that Reish Lakish says that if I give a shalheves to a 10-year-old, I'm going to be chayev because I'm not smart. Here the Gemara says that, hold on 1 second. Rabbi Yochanan had a crazy shita that even if I give a child a torch, I would not be liable for the damage that he caused. And that must be that the equivalent case by a shore is where it is untied and the pit is uncovered. Why is it that according to Rav Yochanan, who holds that a shalheves is pater, then why would we have a case scenario where there is a different halacha between shore and bor on the one hand and eish on the other? The Gemara says, Hasam tzavsa decheresh kagarim. And the Gemara just uses cheresh as an example. But let's say that a cheresh is the one that I had given the torch to. If he stands there perfectly, all is fine and good. He has to do a maisa to move the fire over to another item to light a fire. So that's what the Gemara says. It's a shtickle chiddush, but that's what Rav Yochanan would have to say. Hasam over there, that's tzavsa the cheresh kagam. When would we say that a child is pater? That's when the cheresh is pater, when he's actively doing something. But hacha lo tzavsa the cheresh kagam. It depends how much action that child is actually doing. Lemaisa, the Gemara does point this out, and it seems to be that it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch this way: that if we were to give matches to our child and they cause damage in a neighbor's property, we as parents are not held accountable because there's too much for the child to do. We should be better parents. I remember growing up when I would ever play with matches. I remember one particular time that my mother got very southern on me, and don't play with matches kind of a deal. I remember distinctly. I was pretty young. But that's good. It's good. It's good parenting, but not because of Nezikin. It's just good parenting. So you don't burn yourself or the house down. Okay. Says the Gemara, 8 lines from the bottom on Testament Bays. We're now going to compare the strengths and weaknesses of the Avos Nezikin. We're going to compare and contrast. In this case, you'll see shor and bor. Let's get started. Tanu Rabbanan. Chomer b'shor mi b'bor. There's something that's stringent about shor, more so than bor, and chomer b'bor mi b'shor. And the opposite is also true, that bor has a chiddush to it as well. Let's go through the permutations. Chomer b'shor mi b'bor. What is strict about shor more than bor? Shehashor mishalem es hakofer. Kofer is a din in Chumash that a person has to pay if there's damage from a shore. V'chayev v'shloshim shel eved. And if my animal kills your eved, I owe you shloshim shekel. Nigmar dino, once the psak on a shore has been given in that it's chayev misa aser behana, that the animal's aser behana. The darko leilechu lahazik, and a shore is mobile, so a shore can walk around and it can therefore cause damage. And none of these, masha'ein kain bebor, none of these apply by bor. So we have a lot of chidushim as it relates to the world of shore that don't apply by bor. And on 2 lines from the bottom, the Gemara says, but what are the chumras? What are the chidushim by bor that don't apply by shore? What is the chumer bebor mi b'shor? Shehabor, very, very important for the lumdus of the Masechta. I'll articulate this clearly so that we have it very clear for our learning for the rest of the Bavas. Shabor tchilas asiyaso lenezek umuad mitchilaso. When you have a pit, we assume a pit is muad the second it's created. But when you have a shore has to establish itself as evil first. So when we compare tam and muad, we've spoken about tam and muad before. Tam is a docile, calm animal. A muad is an animal that's dangerous. Machlokes Abai Rava, how we get there, 2 or 3 occurrences. Not for now. But when we say that a shore is, when it starts out a tam, that's only true by a shore. But if you dig a hole in the ground, that's muad from day one. And that's why there's a chumrah by bor. That's what the Gemara says over here, 2 lines from the bottom. Shabor, tchilas asiyaso lenezek umuad mitchila. So masha'ein kain b'shor. Very good. That was comparison number 1 between the world of shor and bor. And on the top of Yud Amud Aleph, let's compare 2 more things. Top line, first words. Says the Gemara, chomer b'shor mi be'esh. Fire is also more stringent, has more chidushim than eish. In what way? We'll see in a moment. And chomer be'esh mi b'shor, there's also a chomer by eish. Let's go through each side. Chomer b'shor mi be'esh. What is unique about shor as it relates to eish? Shashor meshalem kofer, like we saw when we compared it to bor. That by a shor you have to pay kofer, which is a Torah's consequence for your animal damaging. V'chai b'shloshim shel eved, if the animal gores an eved, we have to pay shloshim shekel. Nigmar dino aser behana. And when an animal that's a shor is nigmar dino, when a bezdin decides on that animal that it needs to die, from that moment it becomes aser behana. And masro l'cher shot b'katan chayiv. And if I were to have given a shor, then the katan would have been chayiv. Masha ein kain beish. This was implied in the brisa that we started with in the middle of Testament Beis, that there's a different set of halachos in regards to fire than there is in regards to shor. That's why the Gemara says over here that by shor, we have this din that if you give it to a cher shot of a katan, you're chai. But by fire, that's not true. That was exactly the case we saw before. Machlokes, Reb Shimon, Reish Lakish, and Reb Yochanan, what the application is. Is it only a gacheles or is it even a shalheves? That we saw in the bottom of Testament Beis. But the point was still clear. And what about 5 lines down on Yud Amud Aleph? What about chomer be'esh mi b'shor? What's unique about eish that is not applicable to the world of shor? Says the Gemara. Sheha'esh, mu'edes mitchilasa. Bor and eish have a similarity, which is dissimilar to shor. What?
So the fire, I'm just reading the English here. The fire is mu'ad from the outset? Okay.
Yep. Because fire is dangerous inherently. A shor is not dangerous inherently. Most cows are calm. I mean, I don't know anything about cows, but I'm presuming most cows are calm. I am a zoologist. I'm sure there are dangerous cows. I'm sure. Yeah, that's true. So I'm not talking about those things, but I'm just saying most animals are docile until proven otherwise. So that's why when it comes to fire, when it comes to eish and bor, those two things are dangerous out of the gates. You have a hole in the ground, that's just dangerous. It's just dangerous. You have a fire, that's dangerous. We tell our kids, don't touch fire, you're going to burn yourself. That you don't have to touch it 3 times to establish. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why the Gemara says that chomer be'esh mi b'shor, 5-6 lines down, eish has one thing over shor, which is that sheha'esh mu'edes mitchilasa ma she'ein kain b'shor. Now let's compare eish and bor. Chomer be'esh mi bebor, v'chomer bebor mi be'esh. We see that there's something unique about eish more so than bor, and something unique about bor more so than eish. Let's go through. Chomer bebor mi be'esh. What's unique about a bor as it relates to eish? Shetchilas asiya, so lenezek, that the very beginning of a bor is for damage. Masro l'cherushot v'katan chai ma she'ein kain be'esh. These things are not true by eish. And chomer be'esh mi bebor. What is unique about eish that doesn't apply by bor? Fire moves. Pits don't move. Says the Gemara. Sha'esh darka le'lechu l'hazik umu'edes lechol. And they're muad, they are assumed to be damaging no matter what. Le'echol bein davar ha'ro'ila, whether or not it's consuming its normal fuel or an abnormal fuel. Bein davar she'eno ro'ila, ma she'ein kain bebor. By bor, we have distinctions because by a bor, not everything that falls into a bor is the owner going to be chayav. We learned about kalim the other day, that if kalim fall into a bor, we're going to see machlokas about this now, but if kalim fall into a bor, then according to some, you're not chayav on that damage. Masha'ein kain, when it comes to eish, whatever it consumes, you're obligated. I asks the Gemara a quarter of the way down at the beginning of the line. V'lisni chomer b'shor mi bebor, we're missing something in this brisa. We should have learned that there's a stringency by shor more than bor. Shashor chayebo esakelim, that when a shor steps on a kli, the owner is obligated. However, masha'ein kain bebor. But when it comes to a bor, as mentioned, there are shitas that hold that if kalim fall into a bor, the owner is not held accountable. So why don't we make this distinction? When the brisa was comparing shor and bor, why didn't we distinguish between the fact that shor, when it damages kalim, the owners are chayiv, but bor, when kalim fall in and they're broken, you're pater. So to this, the Gemara says, great question, but money. It must be that the author of this lengthy brisa is Rabbi Yehudahi, Timechayiv al nizke kalim bebor. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that if kalim fall into, I'm going to use this as an example. I don't know if it's a kli. Let's just, kids are riding a bike and the bike falls in, kids fine. The bike falls in and it breaks. So that's a machlokas tanaim, again, assuming it's a kli. That's a machlokas tanaim if you're going to be held liable as the owner of that bor. But if we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you're mechayev al nizke kelim bebor, that if a kli were to fall into a pit, you are chayev. That's why the brisa didn't distinguish between shor and bor as it relates to kelim, because Rabbi Yehuda holds you're chayev. There's no reason to distinguish if you hold that way. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. Third of the way down. Rabbi Yehuda, if in fact Rabbi Yehuda is the author of our Mishnah, and the reason that we wanted to go in that direction is because Rabbi Yehuda answered the question of why we didn't make a distinction between shor and bor by kelim, a Masefa, the brisa, won't work out well for him. What did the brisa say? The brisa that we just saw. We saw that the brisa said Chomer be'esh mi bebor she'esh darka leilichu lahazik, that we said that fire is worse than a bor because fire travels, and muadin, it's muedes, I should say, that it is by its nature going to consume whatever is in front of it. Lechol bein davar hara'ila, bein davar she'ein ra'ila. And now the Gemara says ma she'ein kain bebor, that by bor it's not true. Oh, so we have to figure out what it means ra'ila and davar she'ein ra'ila. Davar hara'ila ma'ninhu. What's a normal thing for fire to consume? I think we all know. It's wood, says the Gemara, eitzin. What's davar she'ein ra'ila ma'ninhu? What did the brisa mean when it was talking about a fire that consumes something that it should not really be consuming? It's not a normal thing to consume. Kelim. So says the Gemara, that would be ma she'ein kain bebor. So it seems from the brisa that kelim are different than bor. It seems that there's a stira in the brisa that Rabbi Yehuda can't be sovel. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that if kelim fall in, you're chayiv. But there's an implication in this brisa, the difference between that which is normal for a fire to burn and that which is not normal for a fire to burn. And since kelim are not the normal fuel for a fire to burn, therefore we should assume that you're exempt. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, if you want to say that our brisa, the lengthy brisa we've been learning as we compare and contrast the Avos Nazikin as Rabbi Yehuda, can't be. Ha'amris mechayev ha'ya Rabbi Yehuda al nizke kelim bebor. But that's not what our brisa implies. It's nice you're trying to overlay the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. It doesn't work. So the Gemara pivots. The Gemara says you're right, and we're halfway down on Yud Amud Aleph, another amud to go. Really, we hold like the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan are of the opinion that when kelim fall into a bor, you're potter. And why wasn't it listed as a difference between shor and bor? Because it wasn't an exhaustive brisa. The brisa says that it should have been included. Really, Rabbanan he v'tan of a shiur. The author of our brisa, there were many differences between shor and bor. One of them was kelim, and we left it out. But really, we hold like the Rabbanan, that if kelim were to fall into a bor, then the owner is pater from any damages of those kelim. So as we know, this is a Shas concept. We've seen this a dozen times in Shas. Whenever a Mishnah excludes one thing, it has to at least exclude one other thing. We assume that Mishnayos are either exhaustive to the point that nothing was left out, or they were not exhaustive and numerous things were left out. So if you want to say, and you can do this, if you want to say that the reason why we don't distinguish between shor and bor as it relates to kelim is because it was left out, that's fine, no problem. We hold like the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan hold that when kelim fall in to a bor, you're pater. And the reason the brisa didn't distinguish was because there were things left out. What was another thing that was left out? That's what the Gemara says. My shiur, the high shiur. What else was left out of the brisa in addition to the fact that kelim are pater? Says the Gemara, shiur tamun. What was left out is if, let's say that I store a very, very valuable book inside a bale of hay, and that bale of hay gets lit on fire. So now I've ruined the bale of hay, but I also ruined that which was tamun, which was hidden inside the bale of hay. So says the Gemara, pater. That let's say I keep that there and you burn that down, the halacha is that you're pater on paying me back for that which is hidden. So now we have two things that were left out of our brisa. The first thing that was left out of our brisa when we discussed the differences between shor and bor, the first difference is that kelim was left out. Kalim is pater by bor and chayiv by shor. Guess what? The same thing is true by tamun. That if a shor damages something that was tamun, chayiv, but if a bor damages something which was that if an eish damages something that was tamun, you're going to be pater. And the Gemara says, actually, we could even say, like the answer that we just rejected a couple of minutes ago, really, we could even say it's Rabbi Yehuda. And it's not a stira, because really what we should not have done was learned that the davar she'ein ha'ra'ui in Ra'ila was talking about Kalim. What did the brisa mean when it said the davar she'ein ra'ila, that brisa that's 12 lines up? So there the Gemara says, Lav la'asuye Kalim. You wanted to say that which was the abnormal thing which fire consumed was kalim, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda can't work with our brisa. No, perhaps that's not true. Ella, perhaps it's la'asuye lichacha nira v'sichsacha avana. Perhaps what we're saying is the ptur is when a fire singes that which is around you. If it singes rocks, if it singes equipment and it gets stained, maybe we can assume that was going to be a difference between them. It says the Gemara, therefore we have a reasonable answer for Rabbi Yehuda too. Asks the Gemara, Maski Rav Ashi, I don't understand. What we should have done was lisni chomer b'shor mi bebor. We should have written that there was something, that there was a difference between a shor and a bor. Shashor chayev bo, shor psulei mukdashin, mashe'ein kain bebor. Chomer b'shor mi bebor. Shashor chayev bo, shor psulei mukdashin. Let's say that we had an animal that was mukdash to be a korban, and then it got a psul. That's what psulei mukdashin are. It's animals that should have been put on the base on the mizbeach, but a psul took place. So that also should be a difference between a shor and a bor, because there we would have said by a shor you're chayev, mashe'ein kain bebor. So says the Gemara, Iyamris bishlama l'Rabbanan hi. If you want to say like the answer of the Rabbanan, remember the Rabbanan said that multiple things were left out of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was not exhaustive in regards to the differences between shor and bor. It left out kalim, it left out tamun, and here's a third one that it left out, which is psulei mukdashin. That's great. I did the shiur hach, shiur nami hach. Because we already left out kalim and we already left out tamun, no big deal. We've left out multiple things from our Mishnah, good to go. Ella. But if in fact you want to say, Rabbi Yehuda, if you really want to say that our Mishnah is in fact Rabbi Yehuda, then this is the only thing Rabbi Yehuda is leaving out. And if that's true, that Rabbi Yehuda is leaving out the case of psulei mukdashin, my shiur to high shiur. What else was left out according to Rabbi Yehuda? I understand, again, like before, the Mishnayos don't have to be exhaustive when they make a list. And perhaps Rabbi Yehuda is right that what was left out over here was the case of psulei mukdashin, that by shor you're chayev and by bor you're pater. Very possible. But if we say that one thing was left out of this brisa, then a second thing must also be left out. Therefore, the Gemara says, my shiur to high shiur must be shiur dash beniro. That when the animal is dash beniro, the animal's walking around, it's trampling fields. Maybe that's what was left out. Says the Gemara, no, imishum dash beniro, that can't be, because lav shiurahu. That was not left out of our Mishnah. The Hatana has the language. Our Mishnah already writes, Shekain darko leilechu lahazik. We know that shvarim walk around and they damage things when they step all of the time. I went horse riding this past summer. Every footstep they took was like 3 inches deep into the ground. They ruined it. The grass is not growing there anymore. They ruined it. And that's fine. It was a horse trail, so it didn't matter. But if you have a shore walking around regular people's grass, it's going to start ruining things after a while. So the Gemara says that we can't have it be that in addition to that which was a psulei mukdashin, Rabbi Yehuda was also talking about dash beniro, because dash beniro, trampling ground, was already included in the Mishnah's phraseology of shekain darko leilechu lahazik. We therefore fall back on the appropriate answer of our Gemara, that our Mishnahs really like the Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan hold that kalim are pater when they fall into a bor, and so is tamun, and so are psulei mukdashin. So that is an appropriate summary of our Mishnah, that when we look at the brisa, I should say, not our Mishnah, the brisa that compares shor and bor, there are numerous things that are left out of the Mishnah, and we hold like the Rabbanan. Here are the 3 that we know of. There are 3 things that were left out. That if you have a case of kalim, by shor you're chayev if they get hurt, by bor you're pater. If you have tamun, by shor you're chayev, by bor you're pater. Psulei mukdashin is the 3rd. What? What? By tamun, by eish, right? Right. Wait, that should, right. Is that also true by bor? It doesn't really apply. And what would be the case? It has to be by Aish. And then lastly, Psule Muktashin is also a distinction. Very good. That brings us to the two dots. And now we're going to dig into one of the difficult languages that we saw in our Mishnah. The Mishnah writes, Hechsharti b'miktas nisko. We had said this strange language that if you do partial damage, that you're going to be held accountable as though you damaged it in full. And that is not a simple thing. So what does that mean? Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabban, the Brisa writes, Hechsharti mixas nizko, chavti b'tashlume nizko. If in fact I was machshir a little bit of damage, it's really like I was mashlim, that I caused all the damage, kehechshar kol nizko. So what's the case where my partial damage is treated like full damage? What is that? So says the Gemara as follows, Ketzad. Hachofer bor tisha. Let's say I dig a pit and I only dig it down to 9 tfachim. We have a halachic assumption that death cannot occur with a pit that's only 9 deep, only with 10 deep. And then uba acher, you come along, v'hishlimo le'asara. You dig the pit and make it 10 deep. Who's the murderer? The guy who dug 9 or the guy who dug the 10th? Ha'acharon chayev. So what do we see over here? That perhaps the case of our Mishnah, where I only did a little bit of work, but I ended up taking all of the brunt of the responsibility, is if I were to have been in a case scenario where I dug the 10th and then an animal falls in and dies. And this is Udeloke Rebbe. Rebbe disagrees with this idea, where the person who dug the 10th tefach is the one who's solely accountable. The Tanya, Hachofer Bor Tisha, this is the Tanakama, this is our Shita, not Rebbe. If somebody digs 9 deep, Uba Acher v'hishlimu le'asara, ha'acharon chayev. And if somebody digs 9 deep and then another person digs the 10th, the last person is chayev. Rebbe argued. Rebbe Omer, achar acharon lemisa, achar shnehem lenizakin. When it comes to misa, yes, you're right that the person who dug the 10th, he's chayev. But by nizikin, both people are held accountable because damage could have happened even in the 9th. So that's what the Brisa says according to Rebbe. Rav Papa Amar, no, lemisa divrei hakol. Everybody agrees that when it comes to the 10th tefach, it's going to be the responsibility of the last person. Even Rebbe would hold that way. Ika de Amre, some say that Rav Papa's line came in a different way. Maybe the phraseology of our Gemara was lema de lo Rebbe, and Amar Rav Papa, no, lemisa divrei uvedivrei hakol. Everyone agrees that when it comes to misa, that because misa can't happen until the 10th tefach is dug, so he who digs the 10th tefach is the one held accountable for murder. It says the Gemara, Maski Fleur Zera, that's very nice that you found an answer where my partial responsibility led to my full responsibility. Namely, I only dug 1 tefach, it got me to the level of 10, and therefore I'm obligated for what happened. So it says the Gemara, V'su leka. There are other cases of partial responsibility that yield full responsibility. What are those examples? 6, 7 lines from the bottom. Va'ika, Masar Shoro, L'chamisha b'nei Adam. I gave my animal to 5 people. Upasha bo echad mehen v'hizik chayev. And under the watch of one of those 5 people, maybe it was a difficult animal to watch, they needed a bunch of people to watch it, then the animal did some damage, so that last person is chayev. Says the Gemara, hechidami. I don't understand the case. Ilema, if you want to say dibalav ihu lo hava mintar, that without the 5th guy, the animal wouldn't have even been protected in the first case, he wouldn't have been safe. Pshita di'u kavid. Obviously, the 5th guy is held accountable. And on the flip side, ela dibalav ihu nami mintar. But if it would have only been, if it was already safe with less than 5 people, maybe only needed 3 guys, but you hired 4 just for fun, but really it only required 3 or 4 guys. So then says the Gemara, my kavid, the 5th guy is irrelevant. How can you say he's chayev? So it must be ela dibalav ihu nami mintar. Mike obviously says Gemara, so therefore that's not a good argument. You can't say that the case of Masar Shor Lechamisha is another example that fits within the language of our Mishnah, where our Mishnah writes that middle of the road language of Hechsharti b'mixas nizko. So says the Gemara, but I can give you another one. Here's another example of something that's kind of half-seas, where when I do a small thing, it leads to my full responsibility. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, Maski Fleur of Sheshes. What about the case Va'ika mar bechavilos? Let's say I have a fire in my yard and I really don't like you. So what I do is I stack some bales of hay so that the fire will catch from one to the next and burn your property down. I'm not the biggest tzaddik in the world, but that's what marbe bechavilos means. I create a scenario whereby your property gets damaged. So what did I do? I only added 2 bundles. That's it. I didn't light the fire. I just added 2 bundles. So says the Gemara, Hechidami, turning to the top of Yudam at base, we're going to be going, as mentioned, to the last of the short lines. If without my adding those 2 bales of hay that connected the fire from my yard to your yard, if without me it wouldn't have gotten there, I'm a mazik, pshita. Ella, it must be dibalav ihu azla, my ka'avid. But if without the 2 bales of hay it wouldn't have gotten there, then how can you even say I'm held accountable at all? So says the Gemara, that case doesn't work either. So now we're going to try another case. We have 2 more attempts. Here's our 3rd attempt as to trying to find another middle of the road case. Maski flora papa, v'ha'ika hadatanya. We have a brisa. This is not a fun scenario. Hey sheyashvu al safsal echad v'lo shavruhu. 5 guys are sitting on a bench. The bench's integrity holding up. Uba echad v'yashav alav v'shavro. This happened when I was in Hillel Torah, where somebody sat down, and when that person sat down, the bench broke under them and everybody fell. Says the Gemara, the last guy is chayev. So let's say the bench can hold 1,200 pounds. You got 5 guys sitting on the bench. Everybody weighs 200 pounds. And the next guy who sits down is 250. So he broke the bench. He shouldn't have sat down. He should have known. So says the Gemara, V'amarab papa, kigon papa bar abba. Who is the Zafta Geyir who sits down, the big guy? The Gemara says that Papa bar Abba was very big, and he would be the kind of guy who, when he would sit down on the bench, he'd be the reason that it would break.
Corpulent.
Oh, of course, yes, corpulent. It should have said Zaftig. It would have been a much better word. Yeah. Well, it has to be corpulent. You can't say overweight. It's not. It's pasnished.
I know, but
It's not PC.
Huh?
Huh? You can't, yeah. I mean, you're not wrong in what the wording means, Rabbi Sandberg. You're right, but it's not PC. You got to say it the right way. And this was written well before PC was as sensitive as it was. This is a whole new realm. Ahead of their time. Okay, so it says the Gemara, Hechidami, what's this case where the bench fell apart? Ilema dibalav. Yeah, they say that about Rav Yochanan. That was the language of the Gemara about Rav Yochanan. He was not PC. He just called it like it is. Yeah, the Rishonim were always like that. They just.
I don't think PC was a thing.
What?
In the 1000s,
Yeah.
I don't think PC was a thing.
He was in the 1100s, but it wasn't much better. No,
But it didn't matter because he just spoke people.
nobody was offended when they called him a Baal Basar. It was complimentary in the Gemara. Wasn't a secret. It's not a secret. It's identifying someone by it's the bigger person. It's not, we in our culture, we're not used to that. As a descriptor, it is we teach this to little children. What's the difference between these 2 pictures? Oh, this one has a line that way, this one has a line that way. So you go to the Apple store and they take your name and they don't write I'm the Jewish guy, they'll write tall guy, white shirt. I'm like, first of all, I'm not tall. Second of all, why don't you talk about the Jewish guy? It's a fine distinction, and I'm happy to be Jewish. They would never do it. But we teach kids, this is what we do when we learn. We teach chakiras and distinctions and find differences. But then we see a difference, call it whatever, it doesn't matter. You can't, you got to zip the lip. You're not allowed. But we train ourselves to make differences. That's what we do. That's what Talmud Chacham is. Okay, we'll talk about this another time, or maybe not. So it says the Gemara, what's the case of the bench breaking? Ilema dibalav ihulo ispar. If without the last guy, let's say he weighed less than 200 pounds, right? So without the last guy, it wouldn't have broken a pshita. If you needed him to break it, okay, we understand. El dibalavi hunami ispar. Without him, it's going to break. My cup. He wasn't the guy who broke he wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back. Says the Gemara. Before sof. Therefore, the Gemara says that this case cannot be another sample of our Mishnah. We're 0-for-3 on trying to find other samples. But says the Gemara, wait, we still want to understand the case of Rav Papa with the broken bench. Sof masnisa hecha mitarsa. Still, how do we have a case where the last guy is chayiv? Says the Gemara, lo tzricha dibelav ihu have a mispar betray sha'eh. Without the last guy, the bench would have taken 2 hours to break. The hashta isbar bechadasha. Now this guy sits down, and it's not going to last 2 hours. It's only going to last 1 hour.
So it's not right away.
Correct. The Omar Le'i Lav At Without you, we would have sat, we would have chilled for a while, and we would have gotten up off the bench and nothing would have broke. You sat down, we lost our 2 hours, and now that we sat for an hour, you made it break, it's your fault. So it says the Gemara, ilav atun bididi lo have a misbar. You're right that I sat down, but if I sit down and it doesn't break, then the disbursement of all of our weight is what broke it. It wasn't a momentary thing. It was an hour later. Don't blame me. You also weigh 200 pounds. Don't blame me. So the Gemara says, you're 100% right. This is a great point. Lo tzricha, what did the Brisa mean that Rav Papa brought? Lo tzricha de bahade de samech behu tavar. He walked over and the man put his hands on someone's shoulders. And as he put his hands on someone's shoulders, that guy couldn't get up and his weight was holding him down. And that's why he was chayav. But it has to be crystal clear that he was the reason that it broke. The other guys couldn't even get up. That's what the Gemara says as the example. Says the Gemara, Pshita. Yeah, you walked over, you pressed down on a man who was sitting on a bench that was weak, and you broke the bench. Says the Gemara, not so simple. Ma'u detema, a third of the way down. I might have thought, kocho lav kigufo dami, that the pressure that I put on your shoulders as you sit on the bench is somewhat indirect, and therefore it's not kigufo, it's not me doing the damage. I put my hand on your shoulders, you're sitting on the bench, your weight compounded by my weight is what broke it. Kamash malan de kocho kigufo dami, de kolhecha de gufo tavar, kocho nami tavar. If it would have been that he sat down and it would have broke, then him leaning on the guy on the bench and then it broke, he would be held accountable. Therefore, lemaisa. Let's say that someone is leaning up against a wall, a piece of drywall, and you take your hand and you gently, like you bump into him, just joking around, and the wall breaks, you're guilty. He was fine without you. You made it worse. And because he couldn't do anything else about it, he couldn't control it, you are the guilty one. Says the Gemara, one last attempt of adding another example. Remember, we already found our example of if someone who digs the 10th tefach, we want to see if we can find another partial case. The suleka, do we not have another one? Says the Gemara, we have a brisa. And the brisa writes as follows. Hiku asar b'nei adam be'eser maklos. Let's say that a man is being hit by 10 sticks. This happened today. I don't know if you saw the news. A high school kid was beaten to death in Texas by a group of his peers. Half of it fell. That's what? No. No, also true, but no. So the person was beaten with sticks. Why is everybody patur? Because we don't know who caused the death. We don't know. Everybody's patur. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir pulls out one of the kids and said, no, if it's sequential hits, we go around. You ever see those pictures of people? I've been working on the railroad. They have one guy hit the stake in, they have 4 guys hitting the things at one at a time, because that way they can get more hits in at the time. It works great. But if the last guy hits and then the patient dies, so then so that's a good example. 9 guys hit, I'm the 10th, and if I hit and he dies, it's my fault. But I only did one thing. In and of itself, it wouldn't have killed him. But when you aggregate all of the hits together, of course it would have killed him. Says the Gemara, you're right, but b'ktala lo kamari, that our Mishnah is not dealing with death. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? That was the case on the bottom of the previous page. That was the case of the boar. You dug 9, I dug the 10th. We just said that I was held accountable. Says the Gemara, how can you say that? After all, maybe we're just talking about that we're not talking about cases of machlokes. How can you say that? We already distinguished that we weren't talking about shitas Rebbe when it came to Misa. So it says the Gemara, a very important distinction. If you're going to try to say we hold that it's not like Rebbe and we hold like the Rabbanon, what rules being employed? Yachid v'rabim, halacha kirabim. If you want to say that we don't hold like Rebbe and we do hold like the Rabbanon, no problem. Normal, typical psak rules. However, if you want to say Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira below Rabbanon, there you're holding like a yachid in the place of the rabbim, and that is lo mukminan, that we are not allowed to do. We're going to stop right here at the 2 dots. Emir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up here at these 2 dots and learn the rest of Yud Amid Beis and Yud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.